I'm Randy Nuckolls, partner here in McKenna's Washington office. I'm the compliance officer for our law firm in terms of issues, lobby law disclosure, Foreign Agent Registration Act issues, and I'm part of the political law team along with Stefan and Ben and others. So we are delighted that you've been with us here today. Your set of slides are a packet of information about lobby law disclosure. Most of you are probably very familiar with that. If you haven't already filed your fourth quarter 2011 LDA reports, then you're probably going to be filing them before January 20th here this week. You're also assembling information for your semi-annual LD 203 reports, which are due at the end of the month for any charitable contributions or political contributions that you've made that now have to be disclosed in the lobbying disclosure arena as well as at the FEC. So I'm not going to go through any of the specific details about what the lobby laws require. I think most of you probably know those generally. A couple of just trends and things that we are seeing that I want to mention. Audits abound. More and more agencies of various types are, because of all of the attention on lobbying, because of all the attention, the super PAC, what's happening with the super PACs will only create more attention on this eventually. I predict in the way of audits by the IRS, if nothing else, of C4 entities and their activities. But we are seeing a significant increase in audits. As most of you know, after the Honest Leadership and Open Government Act passed in 2007, it did create a formal audit process where the General Accounting Office audits a select number of Lobby Disclosure Act reports after each filing period. Some of you have probably been through a GAO audit. I work with clients who have been audited, and the first time they get a call from GAO, they don't exactly know what that means. It basically means you go in and share with the GAO your process, your mechanisms for reporting your lobbying expenses. The IRS is asking questions about auditing, about lobbying expenses. I had a large Fortune 100 client. I was in a training program in California for a company on lobby law disclosure and training for compliance with the LD2s and LD 203 reports. And the tax department called me aside and said, by the way, we have been audited on our 2006 corporate tax return. And the first question the auditor asked was, tell me about your CEO's involvement in lobbying. And so they started, is your CEO involved? And they said, well, yes, CEO, he goes to Washington a few times a year, he's involved. The auditor said, okay, what percentage of your CEO's time is involved? And they said, well, we don't actually have any records that shows how much time our CEO spends. We just have kind of generally estimated. Then we're going to start with 9% of your CEO's time. And if you can show me by record keeping that your CEO spent less than 9% of his time in lobbying, then we'll go down on the figures. But if you can't show me that, if you didn't disallow 9% of the cost of your CEO, since lobbying expenses are non-deductible business expenses, then you owe us some money back on your corporate tax return. So they thought, okay, a few thousand, maybe tens of thousands of dollars. And then the auditor said, by the way, did the CEO exercise any stock options that year? Well, the CEO had exercised $50 million of stock options in that particular corporate tax year. And so the auditor's starting position, at least in the audit, was that you owe us back 9% of $50 million unless you already disallowed that as a business expense. So I just tell you that as a cautionary tale to say, be sure that you are capturing all of your lobbying expenses, not just in your governmental affairs office, but in far-flung corporations, as we've been discussing. If you have salespeople out there, if you have executives that are making calls or participating in trade association meetings where strategies are being developed for a particular industry, you activity time that could be subject to scrutiny by a tax auditor or by GAO if you got audited on your LDA report, at least asking those kind of questions. That is also happening in the government contracts arena. DCAA and other government contracts auditing agencies are asking questions about lobbying expenses as well, because lobbying expenses are non-allowable expenses for purposes of determining the cost structure for government contracts. So I've seen several instances lately where a large government contractor, a defense contractor, was using outside lobby firms, and those firms were not providing any detail or discernment between what might be legitimately called business development activities and what was lobbying activities. And so in every case that I've seen and have worked on, the auditor from the government auditing agency wants to define everything as lobbying, unless you can show by record keeping that it was the payments to outside firms, unless you can show that it was something other than lobbying. If you didn't keep good records, you're outside firms. So I encourage you, if you're using outside lobbying firms and they happen to be doing different things for you, lobbying and some non-lobbying activities, they need to be detailing on their invoices to you what was lobbying and what was not lobbying, so that you can protect the tax deductibility or the use of legitimate business expenses you're paying them as a part of the cost structure for government contracts. I just had a client call and said, well, we hired a lobbying firm, and we were paying them somewhere north of $50,000 a month for a very big project. The lobbying firm just disclosed the full $50,000 per month on their reports. Now, some 3 years later, the big government contractor is being audited, and the auditor has looked at the LDA reports, and they vary quite a great deal between what was reported by the lobbying firm and what is being disclosed as lobbying expenses by the major contractor. And so they're having to go back and try to recreate the details, because there were no details. And many of the lobbying firms around town, as you know, don't like to give a lot of details in what they do for you as an outside consultant. It's important that you have good contract language about their compliance with lobbying reports, and that you have good understanding between you and your outside firms about what is going to be disclosed as lobbying or non-lobbying. The other trend that we are seeing is an internal corporate discrepancy between the understanding of your tax department about what lobbying is and the understanding of the Governmental Affairs Office. Often I find that when we start going in and asking questions or doing a training program about lobbying to be sure that the governmental affairs arm of the corporation is capturing all the lobbying activities, the tax department and the governmental affairs department are just not on the same page at all. That's why it's important. I think more corporations, as you've heard this morning, are having full-time compliance lawyers to work on these issues and that understand the nuance of these issues. Finally, in the area of congressional gift and travel rules, I see instances where the staff of and we do a lot of training programs for congressional offices, but where the staff and the outside corporation their understanding of a particular activity, and the staff will go ask the ethics committees of the House and Senate about the rules, and the staff doesn't explain it very well, and the first thing you know, they've gotten a no answer, and it's a lot. Then it's hard to unwind that answer coming from the Senate Ethics Committee or the House Ethics Committee. So it's better to work with the staff to understand if you're inviting them to some kind of an event, whether it's a widely attended event, a charitable event, or something that is legitimate under the House and Senate rules for the staffer to be invited to work with them on the front end so that the description of that event is appropriate and they understand it, so that you don't get and inadvertently get a negative answer. I just had a call from a client yesterday who they had done a site visit, corporate site visit, and there were some issues about the transportation on the property, and the staffer didn't explain it well to one of the ethics committees, and they got a no answer when, in fact, if they had probably gone or if they had it documented properly from the outset, there would not have been an issue with the Ethics Committee. So be in communication about those issues. And then finally, it's already been said, emails can be read very differently by an investigator than they can than a friendly email between one of your governmental affairs people or corporate people and a friend in a government position, a covered official of some type. Stefan tells a good story about going out to this windowless building on Leesburg Pike, where you go with a person who works downtown who's been swept into an investigation of a congressman, and they've captured all the emails, and there are these kind of innocent emails where a congressional staffer emails a lobbyist or someone else in a governmental affairs office and says, you know, I heard you might have some extra tickets for the NCAA basketball tournament at the Verizon Center, and the corporate person emails back his friend on the Hill and says, well, I don't know, but let me see what I can do. 4 years go by, and you don't. That staffer on the Hill's congressman has now been investigated, and all of the emails of that office have been captured. And you put that email in front of a person 4 years later and say, well, what did you do after you email that person? And you don't even remember the email. Now, if what you did was sell them a ticket at face value, that's fine. Or if what you did was told them you couldn't give them a ticket, that's because you can't give them a gift, then that is fine. But the FBI mentality, if they're investigating something like that, may be very different than what your staff mentality is. So just caution your employees, as I know you should, about email communications that have a constant life. I'm going to stop there. Stefan's going to talk a little bit about pay to play and state rules, and then we can answer any questions that people have about specifics which are in your packet.